Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. You can tell by the Commodore 64s on the bench and probably the thumbnail you clicked on to watch this video that we're going to be repairing some Commodore 64s in this video. I recently did a repair video on the main channel where I fixed two of the broken bread bin machines that I have, and these are the ones that are left that are still broken. So let's grab one of these machines and go to the bench and see if the repair is going to be easy, difficult, or interesting. So without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, this is the first machine we're going to take a look at. Another bread bin, bit of yellowing on the keys. They're feeling a little, I don't know, what's the right word? Sticky, I suppose, just because of all the dirt and whatever that's in them. If we flip this thing over, aha, I wrote a note that says bad RAM. I wouldn't be surprised what this means is when you turn it on, it goes to basic, but you get some different amount of memory free, not what you're expecting on a Commodore 64. So it's plugged into the capture device and power. Let's power this on, see what we see. Okay, out of memory error in 0. We have a little bit of corruption on screen. And let's see what's going on. Shift lock was turned on. Keyboard is working. I don't think we can actually make it do anything. Usually when you have no memory, you actually have a totally non-working system. So if we try to print something, oh, it did print. But notice when it printed DDD, it had a couple extra symbols up at the top there, which indicates that we have a bad RAM chip on this particular computer. Either that or there's something wrong with the multiplexing or something else going on. I'm going to grab the diagnostic cartridge here. Let's try the diagnostic cartridge, not the dead test, just the regular diagnostic. Now, this is right away going to tell us we got some bad RAM here. It's saying U10, U12, U21, 22, and 23. So that's a lot right there. Now notice on this screen, it says 0 page is okay. Now, when you're talking about 0 page on a 6502 base system, which this is, that is the first 256 bytes. It's from 00 to FF. Those bytes are critical for the operation of any 6502 base system. And that's because there's a bunch of opcodes that when they address memory, they're using only addresses in that first 256 bytes because it's faster. Instead of having to use 2 bytes as a memory location, you could just use 1 byte and it actually speeds up the entire operation of the computer. So a lot of the ROM code on pretty much everything uses the 0 page a lot to store very frequently accessed information just because it speeds up everything so dramatically. So this thing right off the bat starts doing a RAM test on that first 256 bytes, and that actually passed okay. So we don't have any bad bits in that first little set of RAM. But then it goes on to check the stack page, which I think is the next 256 bytes of RAM. And right away, it detected there were some issues there. And we see a few spurious characters on screen, not to mention it's listing that there are, 5 bad RAM chips there. Now it's detecting that by writing a value into memory in that stack page area and then reading back what it got back. And then it compares what it should have gotten back versus what it did get back. And that's where it's trying to figure out, oh, hey, I'm detecting a couple bad bits. Now, just for fun, let's switch this over to the dead test because the dead test is a Ultimax type cartridge. Oh, right away it's saying bad RAM. Okay. Well, what I was hoping is it would go into the graphical mode in the dead test ROM and maybe we would see a different result. But right away it was just flashing to say that we have a bad chip. So let's put this back in here, regular diagnostic ROM. Notice the bad RAM is different. That is interesting. It's saying 9 and 11 are bad this time. Let's power cycle it again. Now it's interesting because we definitely had like 3 other chips that were bad that first time around. And I don't remember if it was 9 and 11 that are bad. I guess I should just open this thing up and let's take a look. If we see MT RAM, 4164s, then that kind of tells us, oh, look, it's now 10 and 12. So I'm not so sure that this actually has bad RAM. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some other fault on this machine. Let's take a look when we open it up. So this computer is quite yellowed, especially if you look at the back here. Look at this here. But on the bottom, looks really good. It's a little bit of dirt and stuff there, but otherwise in good shape. We do have a RF shield in there, so that hasn't been tossed out. So it's almost like I haven't worked on this. All of the feet are missing, just a little bit of an observation. And according to the sticker here, it says made in the USA. So unlike some Commodore 64s I've recently repaired that came from the same batch as this machine, nothing is in sockets except for the SID. And the VIC-2 is going to be in a socket as well. But everything else, nope. So while I unscrew this, let's just think about some things that might be wrong. Well, one of the things is this thing does have MT RAM. Now, MT RAM's not always bad. You can't immediately jump to that conclusion. But unfortunately, it is pretty flaky. The 4164 stuff specifically. If it's MT RAM, other sizes like 256K chips, things like that, that's actually a different story. Those chips don't seem to have problems. But for whatever reason, from a manufacturing perspective, these chips here, they are just not so good. And taking a closer look, there are those MT RAM chips. Oh yes, not so good. And you notice there's not a lot of flux residue or anything, at least on the top side here, so it doesn't look like they've been reworked. Now, what we do have are some of our MOS friends for these DSLogic chips. And we know that these are junk. If you saw my last video on these machines, I talked about how the fact that these logic chips can be very problematic. On the other hand, though, I think on one of the machines I repaired recently, I didn't have any. I had a few of these chips, and none of them were bad. So it's not a guarantee. It's just be suspicious when you see them on the board like this. Other things on this board are, as I mentioned already, everything is soldered down, including the PLA. That means that we'll have to put that in a socket if that is a problematic IC. I feel that this particular era of motherboard is seemingly the worst when it comes to reliability. I'm just grabbing a tool to open this. I don't know, I feel that like these PLAs in this 1984 era are the worst and the most likely to be bad. Hey, we have a couple ICs and sockets there, kind of interesting, for the clock generator. I don't think any of those are a problem though. If this area of the motherboard has issues, you don't really get a stable video signal. This stuff is all part of generating a clock, which the VIC-2 does generate. It takes the main crystal here and divides that down and generates the clocks for everything else. If there's problems here, you're gonna get like jittery picture and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't think anything's wrong here. I just wanted to take a look at what we have for the VIC, which looks like it's an R8, which is one of the, well, the better of the NTSC ones. Now, what I wanna do here is I just wanna feel around for any hot chips. Of course, the SID chip is going to get warm pretty quickly. The VIC-2 chip gets warm pretty quickly. And actually, the PLA can be a pretty warm running IC as well. Now, the machine hasn't been on that long. I just turned it on. I'm just trying to feel around using my fingers here just to see if anything is out of the ordinary when it comes to hot. MT RAM chips are pretty cool to the touch. So that's cool. Let's touch these MOS chips here. Wow, they're cool as well. It's like nothing is really hot in here at all. All right. All right, I have the oscilloscope probe out because we're gonna start probing around. I don't actually have any specific area that I think is bad, so I think I'm just gonna start with the PLA. Bus conflicts from the PLA can cause all sorts of issues, including these types of RAM issues. Although, looking at the image here, which is exactly the same as it was, I am going to suspect the RAM multiplexers, these two ICs right here, including this terrible MOS version that's in this position. So I think what we're going to need to do is, using the scope, is take a look at the outputs on these and just see if everything looks okay on those two chips. And that means heading over to Zimmer's here so we can get to the schematics we need. 25407. Just search for 25407 and that'll take us to the correct one. So it's this 251-131. So we're gonna load page 1 of 2 and 2 of 2, and we'll start poking around. So I was gonna go to the PLA originally, which is right here. But instead, like I mentioned, I think we're gonna focus on the multiplexers first, and we're gonna be taking a look at the outputs of these chips, which are 4 pins there and 4 pins there. And zoomed up on the motherboard, the two chips, according to the schematics, are U25, which is this one, and U13, which is this one, which are 74LS 257s. And that's exactly what this MOS part is here. All right, we're gonna start on pin 4 here, which is, well, it's on both of these chips. And the system is running. Now, what we're looking for is any signals that just don't look correct, as in like normal TTL signal leveling. This one looks totally fine. I'll just do it to the other chip as well, and I don't think you can actually see what I'm doing. there's no signal right there. Let's just check, make sure I'm on the right pin. Oh, okay, this happens. There's a little resistor pack, and what can happen is your oscilloscope probe can get hung up on it. I don't think I was actually on that pin. Nah, I wasn't. All right, so this one has pretty low levels, actually. Yeah, that's a bit suspect. And the top one is a Hitachi part. If we go back to the MOS part over here, the levels are a little bit higher on there. I'm not going to immediately condemn that chip for that signal, but it just is something to take note of. All right, next one, we're on pin 7 on the lower chip, which is the MOS part. And now we're on pin 7 on the Hitachi part. Again, it's a little bit lower, but it looks fine. I don't see anything out of the ordinary with what we're looking at here. All right, next up we're on pin 9 and we're on the top chip here. Looks okay. Again, the levels are kind of low, but I think that's still fine for TTL. And here is the MOS chip, and again, looks completely fine. And here's pin 12, which is the final pin we're going to look at, and that looks okay as well. And this is the top chip, pin 12. That looks good. So everything actually is looking completely fine. Now, if you're thinking about what these multiplexers do, remember they take all the address lines that come from the CPU and then they convert them into the address lines that go to the DRAM for like the row and the columns. And if there's something wrong with these chips, then what can happen is when one memory location goes to be written to, it actually writes to a different location. Now, I've seen some failures on these multiplexers before where the outputs look fine. You don't see anything on the oscilloscope, but the truth table compared to like what's going in on the input side versus the output side, it outputs incorrect signaling. And that can result in incorrect addresses being written to on the DRAM and stuff like that. So you can't always rule it out just by using the oscilloscope like we have done right now. Now, if you were thinking that you could say probe the output of these DRAM chips to try to see if any of those look bad, problem is you cannot. And that's because the data lines that come out of the DRAM chips on the 64 are just connected to the data bus lines on everything else on the computer as well. So you're going to see a ton of activity on those data lines coming out there that are coming from other chips like the ROMs and whatever else on the system. So it's not really a good test. It would only be a good test if there were some type of a buffer chip between the output of the DRAM and the rest of the system. And some architectures are like that, just not the Commodore 64. So because we don't see any obvious problems with the DRAM, I think the next thing to do is definitely check the PLA. Now, I've talked about this in previous videos. We need to check the outputs of the PLA to make sure that all of them, well, or that none of them are stuck low. Anytime you have outputs that are like too low, or say it only goes from ground to like 1 volt, that's not correct. It needs to be able to go from like, 3, 4 volts all the way down to ground and move up and down properly. So first off, I just went on to pin 10 here. And yep, that looks fine. So that's the ROM high signal, goes to the cartridge connector. It's not going to be doing anything right now because there's no cartridge installed. We kind of know that these signals are working fine because I put the diagnostic cartridge in and it was actually working. And I think those are necessary for that. So that's 10, that's 11, that's fine as well. Here on pin 12, which is an IO line, and that looks obviously really good. We're seeing like, 3 point whatever volts, totally fine for TTL. It drops down to ground. And we have pin 13 here, which is the GRW pins, like graphics read write. I think it goes to the color RAM or something like that. That looks good. And this is pin 15, character ROM. That looks good. I mean, we can pretty much tell this signal is good because the character ROM is working. And that is 16, that's kernel. That looks good as well. And the basic ROM 17, that looks good. If I turn the computer off and on, we'll see some activity there, I think. That's weird. I would have assumed for basic, we would see something. I'll zoom out a little bit here. And that's because basic is running on this machine. It's very unusual that that doesn't have any activity on it. So character ROM, kernel ROM, pin 17 is basic, and then 18 is CAS RAM, which should just be lots of activity because that's for refreshing the DRAM. And that looks fine. Wow, that's really weird. Okay, yeah, so CAS RAM looks good. What's up with the basic ROM? I'm very confused. Okay, so it looks like basic ran there. Okay, now we have a flashing cursor. We didn't have a flashing cursor a second ago. One way to know if I'm like probing incorrectly is I just need to follow this line right here to the chip select line, pin 20 on the basic ROM, so U3. Okay, so I'm on pin 20 on the basic ROM, and yeah. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, yeah. We're getting normal activity there. I don't know. it wasn't capturing it on the, it just wasn't capturing it properly there. But yeah, okay, it's fine. It's totally fine. And this is the kernel ROM. And that's the character ROM. All right, so the PLA, it unfortunately does appear to be working on this thing. So I'm not seeing any issues here with this particular chip. So let's think about this. The outputs look good on the PLA. They look good on the multiplexers. The other MOS chip is this one here, which is a 7712 U27. Now, in my last repair video, I had written on a little post-it note what the different chips were, like the translation matrix, and I don't know where I put that note. But luckily, I still have this spare motherboard sitting right here. So I can see right here that it's the 7408. This is a logic gate here. That is the one that is a MOS chip. Now, from my experience, the less complex MOS chips, like the simple gate ones like this, are generally okay, but it's still worth us checking into. So let's take a look. Here's one of the gates right here, 74LS08, the output on pin 11. And we take a look at the output on the oscilloscope on pin 11, and that looks completely fine. Now, that particular chip has multiple of these gates inside, and the other ones are used like elsewhere on the schematics. So I'm not actually sure where they're used. I'll have to kind of hunt around. There's another one right there. So the output looks like pin 8. So there it is right there on the oscilloscope. Looks completely fine. No issues there. Now, one thing I can do is just look at the data sheet. Oh, there's another one right there, pin 6. Looks good. We'd be looking for something that was stuck low or stuck high. And in case we find that, then what you would do is you would check the inputs on the gate to see if the output matched what the input conditions are. And you might have to check the data sheet just to figure out like exactly what the truth table is for that particular gate. So you could see, oh, well, the two inputs are high all the time and the output should be high all the time. That's normal, or you know, something along those lines. But in this case, we're seeing some activity here going from high to low. So it's not like the output of this is stuck. It's not to say that the inputs going into it are, well, don't match what the output is, but that's much less likely of a failure mode. So at this point, it really feels like I think the fault might be in the RAM itself. And the fact that it's MT RAM is definitely suspect. It's not hot. It seems like everything else sort of checks out on this board though, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. So I think the next best thing is to probably put this diagnostic cartridge back in, and we'll see what it says for a bad RAM chip. And I guess we'll take it out of the board and substitute it, say, into another one of my Commodore 64s, and we'll see what happens. I think we're pretty much getting all the chips as bad, right? So U9 and U11, and I think the alternative is it says U10 and U12 are bad. And then that first time, we also had like these 3 chips that showed up as bad as well. Now, I don't fully understand what the failure mode is of these MT RAM chips. So I couldn't tell you for sure, like if one RAM chip going bad could affect the other ones. I don't necessarily think so. So I don't see why, for instance, if there's like a bad chip over here, that the other row would be affected. Remember that the one row of chips shares the multiplexer, and it's kind of isolated from the other set of chips. Unless there's like a problem with the read-write line or something going on, I don't know. Let's do the power cycle thing a few more times here. And let's just see what we get. Okay, so we're getting 9 and 11. And I notice there's like a $sign next to U18, a spurious one. And there's also one at the top that wasn't there a second ago. Oh, and an @ symbol under the 2 there. Let's turn this off and on. Okay, we're getting those other chips as bad. And look, there's a couple more extra characters on there as well. Now that actually gives me an idea. So we're seeing where there should be a space, an @ symbol sometimes, and also a $sign. So here's a map of the Petsky character set on the Commodore 64, and we're looking at the unshifted one. So this is the ones with graphic symbols. Where we should have been seeing a space, which I'm gonna write this down here, which was hex 20, we were actually sometimes getting $signs, that is hex 24, and we're also sometimes getting the @ symbol, which is right here, and that was hex 40. Let's look at the running system here. I want to see if there's any other spurious characters that we're getting. So I'm going to power cycle this a few more times. And let's see what else we get. So again, we have $signs and an @ symbol. I'm just trying to look for any other spurious characters because those indicate that there's some type of a bit error specifically on certain chips. Wow, it's crashing very, very badly and unhappily here. So power cycle it again here. Yeah, okay, so really we're just seeing those @ symbols and the $signs. And that can help us identify the 2 actual chips that are bad. Not the ones that it says are bad here, but the 2 potentially actual chips that are bad. Yeah. Oh, look at that one. We have a flashing @ symbol. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's pull this cartridge out. That looks bad here. Oh, same thing. We got flashing $ and @ symbols. Okay. I think that's enough to go on. So with the Windows calculator, we're going to type in 20. So this is the space character. Now, when you have a space character, you look at the binary representation of it here. Move that so you can definitely see it. It's all zeros except for a single 1. And remember, this right side data bit is 0, and this one over here is 7. So data bit 5 should be high in the RAM for the space character. So I'm just going to write that on the post-it note for 20. So now let's take a look at 24. And you can see right there that 24 has 0010, 0100, right? That's the bit pattern. And when we look at 40, we're actually getting 0100, 0000. So to say this again, where there should be a space, which it's just this 1-bit set, when the VIC goes to read the RAM, sometimes it's getting this, which is an extra bit right here in D2, because it's 012. But then sometimes additionally, we're getting this extra bit here, which is D6. But to be honest, the problem is that this bit is also bad because this is D5. That should be a 1, because remember, for a space, it's always a 1 right here. And if for some reason that's going away, that's turning back to a 0, and then we're getting a 1 right there. So that kind of indicates that the D6, 5, and 2 chips are all bad. So armed with the knowledge of which 3 data bits are potentially problematic, let's go to the schematic here and figure out which goes to which. So if we look at the data bits here, we can see right there that 6, which is one of the potentially suspect ones, is actually U24. And then D5, which also seems suspect, is this one right here, U11. And then we're also seeing some bad activity here on D2, which is U22. So I think the right thing to do is, because we know the $ is an extra bit and it's D2, and we definitely always see $ there that we shouldn't, I want to focus on U22 as the bad chip. Let's take that off and put a new one on. And if we're on the right track, then that $ there next to U18 should go away. But if there's something else wrong with the system that's like corrupting the data bus in some way, then that will still be there. So I think the right thing to do is identify the chip we want to change, which is this one right here, U22. And let's get that out of the board. All right, so I have the original chip in a socket. So we'll test it just to make sure nothing has changed with this in a socket. Incidentally, while I was doing the removal, I noticed that there's quite a bit of flux under here. So this is the one I just resoldered. So that's why you see some flux over here. But see all this like brown crusty stuff? That was there. I think it wasn't that the chip was replaced though. I think there was just a little bit of rework done on this board. Probably after it was wave soldered, a couple things needed to be touched up by hand, and that was just done at the factory. Although see this row right here, I didn't do that. That wasn't my work. And it looks like it's got it on both sides. So it was this row, and this row. Could have been the bad wave soldering, as I said. Looking again here, the soldering on this IC looks terrible, and maybe that was the same problem that afflicted these. So I am just going to quickly reflow this IC right here, because yeah, there's some bad solder joints right there. Absolutely bad. Okay, it's reflowed. It's kind of ugly until I clean up the flux, but if there was a problem there, which I don't know if there was, just in case, that's fixed. So right now, nothing should have changed on this board. So if we turn this on and the cartridge is not installed, it should just look exactly the same. Yeah, okay. So we do have the $ and we have the @ symbol. And I have a known good chip right here. This is out of the ZIF64. So I'll just straighten these pins a little bit. All right, and with this chip in here, when we turn this on, if this was indeed a bad RAM chip I took out, then we should not see those $ anymore. And we don't. All right, I guess what I'm gonna do is swap out the other 2 data bits that are bad, at least on this screen here, that are causing those @ symbols, and that is U24 and U11, and then we'll see what happens at that point. Okay, I'm back, and I've socketed these 2 chips. I put the originals back in. Now, I might have mixed them up, maybe. I know for sure that this one over here was that bad chip, so I put that way off to the side, but I didn't really pay attention to which of these was which. So if we see a slightly different pattern, it might be because of that. So let's turn this on. Okay, so now we're only getting the the @ symbol. Oh wait, that's right, because the $ one was fixed. Okay, all right, cool. So I went and grabbed some fresh DRAMs here. We'll just put one in first. We'll just put it into that socket just to see if that makes any difference at all. So the one I just replaced is U24, which is this extra bit right here. And I'm kind of thinking that this is the bad chip and that U11 is actually okay, this one up here. But of course, proof will be in the pudding. Aha! So that did not change it at all, which is interesting because remember, for those @ symbols to appear, we need to have 2 bad bits, including that one. But let's change out this other chip, see if that makes the difference. Okay, so now both of them are swapped out. Okay, so it says it's working. Now, I don't believe that this one down here is bad. The first one I swapped out, or the second one I swapped out. The first of the second batch here. Let's put the back to the MT RAM here in this socket. And you might be asking, like, why is that? I don't fully understand if this is really true. But let's just put them back in and let's see what happens here. All right, so U24, which is data bit 6, is back in the board. Ah, okay. Definitely a bad chip there. Let's swap to the other one because maybe this was definitely the bad one and I've already gone ahead and mixed these up. Let's try this one and see if that works. Aha, yep. I had a feeling. Let's put the actual proper diagnostic test back in here. You know, I wish we had a better RAM test for the 64. We didn't have this junk that's on this cartridge here. We need like a proper March test for this machine. But yeah, look at that. So 2 bad chips, even though it was lying and telling us all sorts of them were bad, but we were able to use a little bit of smarts here by analyzing what bad symbols were appearing on the screen to actually figure out which were the 2 chips. Well, that is a very bad SID. Much worse than the recent marginal one I had on the previous repair video. Yeah, that's an unhappy chip right there. Very unhappy. But back to the bad RAM, let's take a look at what actually was bad. So D5 or U11 was actually a bad chip, and so was D2 U22. So this one here was causing this extra bit to be set, that's D2, and the bad one here was causing this bit, which should have been set for the space character, to somehow be unset. Now, why exactly did that result in the @ symbol? I'm not totally sure because it gave me a red herring to make me think that this bit was also bad. But U24, well, that's the one I put back in the board here and was actually fine. Well, we have the keyboard hooked up, and what I want to do is just print a couple characters. So if we print and we do CHR and we do 64, that should give us an @ symbol. There we go. I had to just type it with the correct syntax. So that's the symbol I thought was being printed. Now, if we look at the cheat sheet here, when we were seeing an @ symbol, I thought it was 40, hex 40, which is what we just printed there. And that's this bit here, data bit 6 turned on and data bit 5 turned off, when data bit 5 should be on, remember, because that's what the space, data bit 5 is on for space. But if that is just flipped to 0, and that means all of these bits are 0, because we know that data bit 6 was actually fine. But I kind of wonder if the Commodore 64 character generator prints an @ symbol when the video memory is actually all zeros. And we can test that because screen location 1024 is actually the first top left character there. And if I just poke a 0 into it, there's an @ symbol. Now, if we take a look at the memory location, 1 character to the right of the @ symbol there, I just poked up there, that is 32, which does perfectly coincide with hex 20 there for the space. So I had that correct. And then I was under the impression that a $sign was 24, which should be, what, 36? If we poke that there, that's a $sign at the top. So good, I was correct with that, a little bit of logic there. But the Petsky chart did tell me that hexadecimal 40 was the @ symbol. And if I poke that to that memory location, I get the Petsky character for a dash. which again is kind of confusing to me because here we are back on the Wikipedia article and there it is, 40, hex 40, at symbol. But as you can see, clear as day, it's saying here that hex 40 is the at symbol. So I don't know what this chart's all about, but clearly it's not what I'm expecting. And the only thing I'm thinking is maybe it has more to do with these character strings than the actual memory values that are stored in RAM. So 64 there. Yeah, that's an at symbol. Okay, so that's the basic PETSCII map, I guess, not the actual character ROM map on the 64. That thick book that comes with the 64, or not the one that comes with it, but that programmer's guide, almost certainly would have had the right information in it, but I guess I was just looking at the wrong chart. In fact, now that I think about it, I think what's happening is this basic here is using the same character strings as regular ASCII. So character $64 on another machine that was like a regular ASCII computer, like an Apple II, would have also printed the at symbol for 64, but that's not actually what the memory locations are based on the character ROM. So I should have looked up the character ROM map, and that would have given us the right information. Okay, here it is. So I just Googled for C64 character map ROM, and this is what came up. And there it is. There's the at symbol at location 0. So that's kind of unfortunate, actually, because if I had found the right map there, I wouldn't have made the mistake to take out that extra chip on the machine that was not actually bad, because that would have told me with certainty that was just those 2 bits that were wrong, and that would have taken me directly to the 2 RAM chips. So this was a really good exercise. Even though this was just like bad MT RAM, I wanted to show that it is possible using the visual characteristics of what you're seeing on the screen to identify which were the 2 bad RAM chips. Now, when you have bad RAM, you can have all sorts of different failures. And if the failure had been in the 0 page, like there were a bad bit down there, then probably the computer would have just been a black screen. And you might be asking, why was the diagnostic ROM telling us that all sorts of chips were bad? Well, I think that is happening because the RAM test in the diagnostic ROM is frankly terrible, and it relies on the working stack on the 64. And I think there were bit errors in the stack area. So while it was doing its calculations to try to figure out which chips were bad, it was being affected by the bad RAM itself, and that was giving us false readings. A diagnostic RAM test that relies only on code in ROM and doesn't rely on the RAM at all, so it avoids use of the 0 page and the stack, is going to give you much more accurate results. And very specifically, that diagnostic ROM that myself and my friend David created for the Apple II is doing exactly that. It never uses the RAM. Well, okay, correction. It checks the RAM very thoroughly in the 0 page first, and if that's working, it does use that first page to then set up some of the on-screen displays and stuff like that, so then it can display more. But it doesn't rely on the rest of the RAM for any of the diagnostic routines, meaning it's much less likely to give you false results, like this one does. Now, on the other hand, the dead test ROM that's in this cartridge as well, that one does that flashing code when you first turn it on. And theoretically, that particular test with the flashing does not rely on the 0 page or the stack, which means it might have actually given us some accurate results. So you count the flashes, and then you go look up the manual for the C64 dead test, and that will tell you which chip on the motherboard it is. Swap that chip out, put the cartridge back in, it will give us a different flash code, hopefully, and then you swap that chip out, and then hopefully you should have no more flash codes, and then you'll have accurate results. In fact, you know what? We know which 2 chips are bad here. Why don't we put these back in the motherboard and let's look and see what the dead test is actually doing, just to confirm that the dead test would have actually given us the correct results in the case of this particular fault. Okay, so I put the RAM back in. You can see we're getting the exact same failure now as we were having before. And I did a quick Google search for the dead test manual, and we'll scroll down to where it talks about the flashes, because that's all that's really relevant here. And here it is right here. So number of flashes, and then it has the corresponding memory chip. Now, you'll notice that there's this revision here that only has 2 memory chips, and that's the one that has, well, the later ones that have just 2 RAM chips, like the short board on the later 64s, but also certain versions of breadboards also have just 2 RAM chips. So in case of, well, any of these flashes, like 1 through 4 is that chip, and 5 through 8 is that chip. But in our case, we have one of the older revisions that has all of these chips here. And let me pop in the dead test cartridge and watch for flashing. So yes, there will be some flashing. So if you don't like that, you have to look away right now. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, it's going really quick. You got to count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Wow, that's faster than I would expect. That's really amusing. I didn't think it should flash that quickly. That's weird. It's flashing so fast. Yeah, it's 6 flashes. So according to this, 6 flashes is U22. And if we look at the cheat sheet here, that's data bit 2. And I think the way the dead test ROM flashing works is it starts with the lowest bit first. So if it has multiple bits that are bad, it's just going to flash for the lowest one. So this one here is U22. That's the first one we changed. So we're going to swap that one out first. And let's turn this on again. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we're getting 3 flashes now, which according to this, U11, which when we look at our cheat sheet, that matches right here. That's the data bit that is actually bad, which is this chip right there. So in with a new chip in U11. And now when we turn this on, there's no more bad bits. So it should actually run. And look at that. So I haven't had a lot of luck with dead tests giving me useful results, but in this case, it's actually giving us correct results. So there you go, a use case where a dead test is actually a good diagnostic routine that gave us accurate results about exactly which 2 chips were the fault. All right, so we know that the SID chip on this machine is problematic. So I'm gonna boot up the Kung Fu Flash here, and we're gonna listen to a few SID tunes just to hear how screwed up it actually is. All right, first we're gonna do the 8-bit dance party just to hear how bad that sounds. That is simply horrible sounding. Next, we're going to play a couple from my SID collection here, which we played in the last video. So Cybernoid 2. All right, well, that was absolutely horrible sounding. So yeah, the SID's very broken, but let's try Legend Intro, because on the last SID I had, it was slightly marginal. This one sounded actually okay. Let's hear how it sounds here. Okay, well, that sounded not super horrible, but certainly not good either. Also noticing like the white line on the left side has like a weird static going on now. I wonder if the SID is somehow like backfeeding noise into the circuit that actually powers the VIC. The VIC 2 on these red bins and the SID running off the same power supply, 12 volts. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something going on with the analog side on the SID, because clearly the analog side is very screwy, that's causing that weird line to be like that as well. Let's try Syncopated. This one sounded completely broken on the marginal SID that I repaired on the last video. Okay, and now we're left with a tone as well. So we're just gonna turn this thing off. Let's swap in a regular or a known good SID just so we can all hear how this is supposed to sound. This is the SID that's making all the weird noises. I put an M on it. Before I put this one in, which I'm pretty sure works, what I didn't do actually is check the 12 volt rail on this thing and see if we're actually getting a good 12 volts on it. Let's see. Yeah, okay, 12.4. It's a little high, but that's actually completely fine. While we're at it, let's check the 5 volt rail output here. Yeah, 5.0087. That looks good. I just wanted to make sure the 12 volt rail was good before I put this in, because what if it was like running at 14 volts or something and somehow the VIC survived and is okay, because it's not misbehaving in any way, but the SID somehow is, you know, damaged because of it. Let's look for that white line to see if it looks different. Yeah, look at that. It is far more stable, but let's let it start playing some music and see what that does. Okay, that one sounds fine. Let's try Cybernoid. All right, so those sound really good. No issues there. This particular SID's a little noisy. It's like hissing a little bit. But let's reboot out and let's just do the old 8-bit dance party. So, yep, this SID definitely sounds a lot better. I stole it off that other motherboard that I've stolen a few other chips off of. So to complete this, really, it just needs a replacement SID. For now, I'm just gonna stick this one back on here, the marginal one. What I wanna do is I'm just gonna run one last test on this with a diagnostic harness before we say that this computer is definitely good. But yep, 2 bad RAM chips, that's it. Even the PLA was good. I mean, we did all that checking. And the MOS chips, yeah, wow. Let's see what the diagnostic harness says about this. While this is running through here, I just wanted to reiterate again, talking about the fact that the dead test did correctly identify those chips. But the reality is that we didn't need the dead test to identify it, at least in the case of this motherboard. If I had looked at the correct character map, I would have been able to figure it out. And I think everything is good, except for the SID, which is bad. So I'll turn the speakers down. Just visually looking at the symptoms, when we turned the computer on, we were able to identify exactly which chips were bad. So if you're someone who doesn't have a diagnostic cartridge like this, I mean, these are very inexpensive, these double-sided ones, so I do kind of recommend getting one of these. But if you don't have one, we still would have been able to fix this computer by just using our eyes and doing a little bit of calculations with this Post-it note here and the Windows calculator. So before we button this up, I'm just gonna clean off the Sharpie that's on this MT chip that's actually not bad. It was erroneously taken out of the board by me. I hate doing that, I really do. If you watch my videos, you know that I'm not a fan of removing chips that don't need to be removed. And I wanna clean up this disastrous mess here with all this flux and stuff. So 100% IPA or 99% IPA. Look at this M4 there. I didn't write that, someone else did. So we'll just get rid of all this here. Might as well try to make this thing a little bit cleaner than it was before I started, right? It's always good to leave things better after you've worked on them or been there, right? Leave it better than the way you found it. So there we go. That looks a little bit better now. For whatever reason, there's like some blue Sharpie there that I drew on there that is not coming off. It's like somehow absorbed into the PCB. Don't really get that. That's weird. Now, while I put this thing back together, I just want to talk again about the method that we use to fix this thing. Now, you can use that type of method with any machine. Now, this is not just on the Commodore 64. It could work on, say, the Apple II. Just off the top of my head, all the Commodore machines, like the PET, VIC-20, C64, obviously, +4, those all used memory mapped display, where, yeah, the main memory is directly mapped into the screen. I'm assuming something like the Sinclair as well is like that. Using the method that we used here, though, doesn't work on something like the Amiga, though, because that thing is far more complicated, or the Macintosh, and that's because it's a graphical display, and you know how those bits map to the screen and stuff, it's all over the place. It's not really something you can easily figure out. But when it's a character-based map like these systems, that's when you can actually just make heads or tails by just using your eyes and bringing up the character map for that particular system. But make sure you don't fall into the same trap that I did this, where I was looking at like the basic ASCII/PETSCII map, and you need to look at what is actually in the character ROM. And on the Apple II, it also uses a character ROM map that does not match ASCII. So character 00 on the Apple II is not just like a blank like it is on ASCII. I think it's also the @ symbol potentially. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it, like the 64, does not directly map to what you would expect in BASIC. So our little note here that says bad RAM will just say fixed. I'll just say bad MT RAM, because that's what this is. And we have a marginal SID. So there we go. This machine is repaired. Well, how cool was that? Doing a repair where the diagnostic said there was a bunch of RAM chips, in fact, all of them, and I was able to just look with my eyes and figure out which were the bad chips. Hopefully you learned that trick about decoding the characters and converting that to which bits are bad, and please don't fall into the trap I did by using the basic character map versus what's in the actual ROM. But in the end, even though this thing has those sketchy empty RAM chips, we only had 2 bad RAM chips that were actually bringing this computer down, and now it's fully operational. Well, and a bad SID, of course, too. And you heard the crazy noises this thing was making. It was kind of like a metal sound in a way, like heavy metal SID music, which is kind of funny in a way. Someone who's interested in circuit bending might get a lot of fun out of this particular bad SID chip. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, but if you didn't, you know what to do. The names of my patrons are scrolling up the side of the screen. They make it possible that I do this full time, so a huge thank you to them. If you want to become a supporter, there's a link in the description below, and you get early access videos and other cool behind the scenes stuff. And hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and you know, all the other usual YouTube junk. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoy these 64 repairs. The pile is dwindling. Maybe eventually I'll actually get all the way through it. So thanks very much for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.